When Assassin's Creed Odyssey was released 4 years ago, I've got to admit, I completely ignored it. I let it pass me by and never really gave it a second thought. But recently, I've started to wonder if I'd missed something, and I thought it was high time for me to give this game a proper shot. When the game first launched, it received some amazing reviews from the official big boys. A 9.2 on IGN, an 83% score on Metacritic, but the players themselves weren't quite as optimistic about the game. The average user score on Metacritic was 6.5 out of 10, and I've read a lot of reports about game-breaking bugs when the game first launched. The game would freeze at random, elements of the HUD would disappear, certain quests would be left open-ended without a conclusion or follow-up. And these are the sorts of things that will easily convince someone to put the game down, or never to pick it up in the first place. There are also complaints about bloating, the concept that the game has been bulked out with meaningless busywork, hours of gameplay to no real purpose. It's even being called a fast food game, and I have some thoughts on that which I'll come to later on. So I wanted to find out 4 years later if A, the bugs have been squashed, and B, from a non-die-hard Assassin's Creed fan's point of view, is the game actually good? Is it worth your time and money to play from an objective standpoint? So, late to the party as always, this is my Assassin's Creed Odyssey review. During the video I'll talk about the story content without going into any spoilers. I'll talk about the combat, the stealth elements, the build mechanics and the gameplay loop. I'll also talk about how the game feels, which I think is something vitally important when picking up a new game to play. I don't think this game is for everyone, and during the review I'll suggest why this game might or might not be the game for you. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is utterly massive. I honestly didn't think there would be this much to do in the game when I first picked it up. I've spent a good 50 hours playing so far, and it still feels like there's so much to do and left to explore. Want to run around in all latest Spartan fashion? Fight with mercenaries and cultists? Take on an entire fort? Single-handedly win a battle between the Spartans and Athenians? Or fight a legendary white lion? You can, but before we get into all that, let's start out with the basics. Assassin's Creed Odyssey originally launched in 2018. It's an action role-playing game developed by Ubisoft Quebec, and it's the 11th major installment in the series. The game features a large open world and puts a lot of emphasis on combat and exploration, rather than just on stealth. Naval combat from previous games also plays a part in your journey. The game's plot tells a mythological history of the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta from 431 to 422 BC. The game world is beautiful, and the scale is immense, and the locations I found were really detailed and fascinating to wander around in, although I won't lie, this was a bit awkward. The graphics are good and the game stands the test of time so far from that point of view, but they're not outstanding other than the picturesque environments. The combat is pretty smooth for the most part, but we'll get to that in more detail shortly. You can pick between a male and female protagonist for your playthrough, and the story follows you on your journey as a mercenary throughout the land. I won't go into the details of the story too much, but there are a lot of twists and turns in the main plot, elements of which can be directly affected by your choices during certain parts of the game. I was surprised at the level of depth the main story goes into, and some of the more dramatic moments are pretty impressive and surprising. I didn't expect it to be that good actually. Some of the side quests are really good and it's pretty funny or even thought-provoking in places, but others, not so much. They're just side quests, and I think that's where some of the complaints originate, but I'll come to that. The voice acting is pretty good. It's not mind-blowingly good, but it's definitely good enough to not completely ruin the experience. In terms of the gameplay, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a cross between an open-world RPG, a stealth combat game and a flat-out free-for-all, with a sideline fashion show thrown in for good measure. There's a built-in transmog system which allows you to pick the look you're after, and as you unlock more options by looting items, you'll be able to put together a hell of a lot of different outfits. The gameplay loop involves following along with the main storyline initially, and then venturing off on your own to uncover secrets around the world. You'll be tasked with things like taking out certain targets, undermining local leaders by taking their money, removing their infrastructure, or flat out killing their lieutenants. After taking down the local leaders for the various city-states, you'll also be able to involve yourself in the territory control battles between Spartans and the Athenians. You can even pick which side you like to fight on for the battle. Outside of the main storyline, there is a ton of exploration to be done. You can find secrets and mysteries all over the game world. Anything from bandit camps, hunting wolves and lions, underground grottos, shipwrecks and sunken temples to explore. You can take part in naval warfare too. Alongside all that, there are two other systems which interweave to help form the bigger picture of the gameplay loop. These are the cultists, which loosely ties back to the original premise of the Assassin's Creed series, the Templars, and there are mercenaries littered around the map. The cultists are hidden characters who you will uncover as you journey through the game. By looting chests and taking out various targets along your journey, you will begin to uncover the identity of the cultists. As you amass them and take them down, you'll be rewarded with gear and XP for your character, and further clues about others in the cult. The mercenaries are basically headhunters. They'll be called upon throughout the game whenever you misbehave. Essentially, the headhunters are there to slow you down in my experience. You might be wreaking havoc across one map, taking down key targets and racing through camps and fortifications, and then suddenly a mercenary is on your tail. They're damn good at stalking you down, and if they're over your level, they can be really challenging to take down, especially if the area you're in has already been alerted to your presence. There can be a number of them hired to find you too. If you have 2 or 3 of them on you at once, it can totally derail what you're doing, and you'll need to either hide and pick them off one by one, or go to find the bounty sponsors. You can either pay off the bounty to clear the map, or you can take out the sponsors, which will lower your bounty level. There are benefits though to taking out the mercenaries. There are perks you'll gain when moving up to the next tier, and each mercenary has a loot drop available for you, which can allow you to target them specifically if the loot would benefit your build. One thing to note is that the level system in this game is no joke. If your enemies outlevel you by even 2 levels, you have to be super careful. Your assassination attempts may not go so well if you're not powerful enough to one-shot the enemy you're stalking, and things have a tendency to escalate very quickly if you're not careful. In terms of the combat itself, I really enjoy this style of combat mixed with stealth elements. You can stealth around and take out priority targets, but for much of the time you'll find you have to fight it out with a number of opponents at once. Sometimes, depending on the scenario, you'll be overwhelmed and you'll need to make a run for it to find a hiding spot and wait for everything to calm down. There is a good parry and dodge system at play, and a lot of options in terms of your skill tree development to let you decide on the approach you would like to take when it comes to the combat. You could take the archer route, the assassin's route, or go flat out melee warrior. You can also reset your skill tree at any time, which means you can play around with the ability and the gear combinations at will. The parry window in the combat is generous in the sense that you can hit it way too early, or even a bit late, and you'll still pull off the parry animation. At first I didn't like how lenient this parry window was, but when you're completely surrounded, at least it gives you a fighting chance. The dodge system is good in the sense that you can dodge or roll out of trouble at any time, but if your timing is on point, you'll get a window of slow time to punish your enemy for missing you. The naval battles are a pretty fun touch, and depending on how much you enjoy them, you can go full on naval commander, investing in ship upgrades and dominating the seas, even to the point of taking mercenaries out in the ship battles and recruiting new lieutenants for your ship. Or, alternatively, you can skirt around the edges of this system and just do the bare minimum and use the ship for transport only. So in terms of complaints, it's really hard to explain. I have a lot of mixed feelings about the game. Yes, there is an element of bloating in the game. Some of the side quests and characters you encounter don't really serve a purpose in the larger scheme of things, but you can only view that as bloating if you don't enjoy the baseline experience. If you enjoy just playing the game, then this won't be a massive problem for you. One thing I would say, however, is that the progression seems quite slow in places, and as the story progresses, you'll find the main missions gated by level requirements. If you're the sort of player who wants to race through the storyline to its conclusion in as quick a time as possible, I feel that you may find Assassin's Creed Odyssey frustrating at times. There'll be roadblocks in your way and a minimum level criteria which will quickly force you into running side quests or exploration before you're in a position to continue onto the main storyline again. In a sense, this removes a certain element of choice from your journey, which some players may find annoying. The good news is that you can earn XP by pretty much doing anything you like in the game. Exploring new areas will give you XP for every time you find something, invading forts or finishing off bandit camps while hitting all the kill targets or items to find will give you extra XP for completion. For myself, I did find it occasionally frustrating, the need to backtrack when I wanted to continue on the main questline. But that being said, the game had a way of sucking me back in. Every time I started to find myself jaded or fatigued with the gameplay loop, I would stumble across something during my exploration or find a piece of gear that gave me a new idea for how to build out my character. The concept of branching storylines and player choice was well executed, really well in places, but for me, part of the fun of this type of system is to play it again later and see how things panned out differently when making different choices. But this game is so huge that in order to do that, you'd need to commit an enormous amount of time to see it to conclusion. Before I wrap this up and conclude, there is of course the discussion about microtransactions too. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of this system. In principle, I hate the thought of buying a game at full price and then being asked to pay even more money to make progress. However, as a note of reassurance, I didn't spend an extra penny while playing the game, and I never felt that I needed to at any point. Aside from that, the game's 4 years old now and very often on sale. I've put some example links in the description of this video if you want to check out the current price. At the time of making this video, the prices are ridiculously low on some platforms. So in terms of final thoughts, personally I really enjoyed my time in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, despite some imperfections I felt were there. I loved the jaw-dropping locations, the massive open world, and the detailed character progression system. I also loved interacting with some of the most notable names from ancient Greece. There are still the occasional bugs to contend with, including some very weird animations, but I didn't encounter anything game-breaking personally. Nothing I encountered stopped me from enjoying my time with the game. The only real complaint I would make is based on my own nature. Fighting with my own impatience, and fighting the feeling that I'm being forced into a mandatory grind to meet the minimum requirements to move on with the main story again. This is where the massive open world has its own drawbacks. My recommendation for what it's worth is, if you're the sort of game that takes a game slowly and patiently, if you enjoy exploring every area and leaving no stone unturned, then Assassin's Creed Odyssey could potentially give you hundreds of hours of playtime, just for the base game. If you're the sort of player that wants to hammer through the main story, then you may find yourself frustrated when you're forced off track by the levelling system and made to engage with side quests which don't really tie into the overarching story. There is a lot to love in this game, but I don't think it's for everyone. Thanks for watching, take care, stay safe, bye bye now.